Down there is Silverton, Colorado. It's there because of this. Silver. Silver from mines like this one created Silverton, named it, made it rich, and kept it rich for a while. Silver brought the railroad in, and now, 84 years later, it's the only train of its kind in the country. Today, Discovery finds an iron horse in Silver Pastures. Hi, welcome to Discovery. This is engine number 473 of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad's run between Durango, Colorado, and this famous old silver mining town of Silverton. It's the last narrow-gauge railroad in the West. Its narrow-track beds and small cars gave it the maneuverability to fight its way around and over and through some of the roughest of all the Rocky Mountains. The railroads were brought in here to help the silver miners get out the rich silver ore that's found, or used to be, high up in those granite reaches. Our monetary system was set up when George Washington was president. It was based on a system of gold and silver, so silver was just as important as gold. And just as there was a gold rush in California in 1849, there was a rush on silver in the San Juan Range of the Rockies in the 1870s.
Bill, this is one of the last of the locomotives they call the iron horses. They burned coal or wood or anything available that would heat the water in their boilers to make steam, so that they could cross the canyons and climb the mountains to get to the silver. Today, the iron horse brings tourists into the silver country and lets them spend a while in the streets and buildings where part of the American past was acted out. It is a past which we have only read about, but the people who live in Silverton today have a way of making it come alive for us, like this. That gunfight was on the once notorious Blair Street. The tourists laugh, elbow each other affectionately, and after a while drift off to the curio shops or start thinking about lunch. The cowboys, desperados, and saloon girls go back to their trigonometry or to their summer reading obligations in English Lit. Everybody's had fun kidding what used to be the truth.
The vanishing smoke of 473 leaves one fact hanging in the thin air of Silverton. There wasn't always a train. There'd been a town, or at least a settlement, since 1873. The train was still 9 years off. In the days before the train, when it seemed only birds and bobcats could get here, there were 1,000 souls who called Silverton their home. Even then, there were citizens who hoped to make their town a city instead of just a geological accident. Citizens like this one, the young wife of the most powerful mine owner in Silverton.
We will have a train at last. There's an account in the Durango Herald for June 1st, which is most encouraging. Let me read it to you. 5 carloads of steel rails for the Silverton extension arrived in Durango from Pueblo last night and were immediately forwarded to the construction location on a special train. The work of laying these rails was begun this morning. And this paper is days and days old, having been brought in like everything else on the back of some mule or donkey. I know I speak for every good citizen of Silverton when I say that I look forward with joy to the day when all those strings of overburdened little Mexican donkeys will be replaced once and for always by a genuine iron horse.
Silverton had earned the gamble of a railroad because she seemed to have endless stores of high-grade silver ore in her mountains. The town had earned the name Silverton when one miner bragged, "Why, over here we bring out silver by the ton." The construction was done against tremendous odds, towering peaks and walls of granite. A scaling job for a mountain goat. But on June 17, 1882, the La Plata miner ran a banner headline.
Train 13 miles from Silverton tonight. We shall be a city at last, a real metropolis. Oh, I know these mountains are yet full of men who go about all day long with a big six-shooter in their belt. And I fully admit that the main streets of Silverton, like other frontier places, have too many drinking and gambling saloons. But yet this town has never passed through such a rough history as some mining camps see. It will soon be one of the most orderly places in the whole region. The train will do us endless good.
On the 27th day of June, 1882, the whistle of the Denver and Rio Grande's work train was heard in the winds blowing toward Silverton.
Now, if the locomotive arrives fully into town by the 4th of July, we shall have the most patriotic and exciting celebration. We shall decorate the place all over with evergreen boughs and proclaim it for the day, Silvery Silverton. The 14-piece military band from Fort Lewis has been invited to play for the Firemen's Dance, and visitors will come from as far away as Denver. Denver, honestly, this very 4th of July.
The train pushed on, but didn't quite make it. They had a 4th of July all right, but the passengers had to come the last 3.5 miles by carriage. No matter. They had rifle matches, shotgun matches, plus races in the afternoon on the part of quarter horses, mules, ponies, and the hook and ladder team. And in the evening, they did have the Firemen's Dance. Nobody seemed to remember that the train hadn't really come to town. When it did come, the track it came on was narrow gauge. It measures exactly 36 inches from rail to rail. It is 20½ inches narrower than today's standard gauge, and that made all the difference in the world. It was the difference between the train getting in here and not because of all the sharp curves and narrow ledges. It meant success or failure in terms of the silver economy, because success depended upon economical transportation of silver ore. And this fact was uppermost in the minds of most of Silverton citizens, especially those directly concerned with the business of mining.
It is a very admirable product, but still it must be smelted, as they say, and that means transport. It is a fact that the Silverton extension of the Denver-Rio Grande Railroad cost a total of $575,366.19. It is a princely sum, but rest assured that the men that parted with that money will see its equal again, and then more. So fine a business will they do in taking this pig to market. As for the market, it is a new town called Durango. Some think it promising, but as for myself, I do not have an opinion. But one thing I do know, Durango will never rival Silvery Silverton.
That's $1 silver the little lady didn't win. Durango, a fresh new town when the railroad got this far in 1881, prospered and grew. And when the silver gave out, Durango eventually far surpassed Silverton. But that's getting ahead of our story. What enabled Silverton to become a mining center was the railroad. There's only one way to understand the size of the job the railroad did in getting through to Silverton. That's by taking the trip there, through the vertical canyons, over rushing rapids, and along fingertip ledges hung out over open space. And we'll do that in just a minute. If London has Big Ben tolling the hours, Durango has a sound totally its own as well. That sound can be heard from 10 miles around in any direction. It means that locomotive 476 of the Durango-Silverton extension of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad is about to take 3½ hours to make its way through just 45 2/10 miles of incredibly rugged and mountainous country. What must the trip have been like for a lady returning from a shopping trip in Denver in the seclusion and comfort of her own private railroad car?
A woman with even half an eye to fashion must from time to time journey to Denver. As for the return trip, it is a long 3 days between Denver and Silverton. And for the final stretch, Durango to Silverton, it's the hardest of all. One must take along plenty to read, preferably items requiring brief attention, since it is my belief that long periods of concentration aboard moving vehicles do induce the headache. One need not worry about the food because the railway cooks are highly thought of. The menu extends from squab and grouse to braised antelope cutlets. And with these other attentions, the journey may not be brief, but neither is it unendurable. Ideal, of course, is a private car such as this one. A quite comfortable drawing room can well nigh convince one that home is close at hand. Simple things, like a comfortable place to read, one's favorite silver, pictures on the wall, and within, a bed and bedroom. Quite comfortable. If one requires a bowl with which to wash, the very wall will render it up. And at the lightest touch, too. It is in fact so pleasant to be so comfortably established that the danger is ever present of totally ignoring the out of doors, which is well worth remarking. For example, take our river.
That river is El Rio de las Animas Perdidas. In English, the River of Lost Souls. That gives you some idea of how difficult the Spanish exploring parties considered this stretch of country. The river is more casually known as the Animas. The tree-covered mountains all around are part of the San Juan National Forest. There's a famous herd of elk here. There are deer. And farther up, bobcats and mountain lions, bears and wild turkeys. Here, where the elevation is 7,200 feet above sea level, the train crosses the Animas River for the second time. There are 5 such crossings in all. A mile from here is one of Colorado's mysteries, a mountain stream called Crazy Woman Creek. Why? No one knows. There are places where you can reach out and touch the dark granite of the San Juan Mountains. And then, without a warning, the rock walls fall away, leaving you staring into the river, far away and far below. The flexibility of narrow-gauge track is easy to grasp when you see some of the curves the Silverton train is required to make. Like this one, where you can see almost all of the rest of the train from your own car. Going from Durango to Silverton and back, the burners and boilers of engine number 476 use up 3,000 gallons of water, most of which comes from streams and waterfalls that feed into strategically located wooden storage tanks. And to convert those 3,000 gallons of water into steam, the engine burns about 5 tons of coal. On a trip like this, you can run out of coal and not worry too much because you can almost always cut wood someplace. But water is blood and breath to the iron horse as it throbs and pants its way into the high country. And getting up steam isn't the only problem the train faces. A group of little animals sometimes provide a very real obstacle to the men who run the Silverton train. The animals are beavers, and we'll find out more about them in just a minute. The old saw about busy as a beaver is annoyingly true to the railroad men of the Silverton extension. These fallen trees have been cut down, not by men with axes, but by small, furry animals with absolutely first-rate teeth. This is a beaver pond, and over there we can just barely see a beaver dam. The trees the beavers seem to like better than any others are aspen, or as they are called out here, quaking asps. The beaver's major food is the bark of the quaking asp. The point at which the local beavers become a considerable problem for the Silverton line is when one of their dam building projects interferes with the railroad's roadbed. These little animals are actually able to back up enough water to flood out the tracks.
Up here in the high country, the mines begin. And here, too, the air begins to thin. And work, so I am told by everyone, is painful and exhausting. And still there are 1,100 feet to climb to Silverton. I have seen men lose their breath and fall to the ground, only to be revived and start their labors anew. I am very glad to be a woman, for this is no easy life for any man.
It was a hard life, and a foreign one, because even if the miners came from towns in this region, the hard vertical mountains that held the silver were desolate country. They were all strangers here, working a land that took their breath out of their bodies. It was a hard life in a hard country. Over there in the rocks is visible proof of how violent, how changeable this country was. Those folded bands in the dark layer of granite across the river are proof of the turmoil and the violence it took to make this country. And on these jagged peaks, in this thin, lung-stabbing air, men worked in mines with names like Happy Jack and Royal Tiger and Black Prince and Buckeye and the Belcher. And they brought out more than $500 million in valuable metals.
In Denver, and even in places closer to home where they ought to know better, I have heard the phrase, the Panic of '93. By this is meant the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. This Sherman Act put the price of our excellent silver at $1.50 the ounce, where it ought to be. I say that silver is in the natural order of things because we have believed in bimetallism, the use of both gold and silver in legal coinage since the days of President Washington. Silverton is a leader among mining communities. We are planning a fine new city hall and the very best of hospitals. We believe the silver price will hold.
But it didn't hold. The price of silver dropped to 83 cents an ounce. And then in one single 4-day period, it fell to 62, well under half its set price. Mines and smelters and silver camps all over the states closed after that 4-day drop. In one period of 3 days, 10 banks in Denver closed their doors. Suddenly, there were empty towns. Eureka, Animas Forks, and Sherman. People began to use an expression left over from the days of California gold. They called these emptying villages ghost towns. But Silverton built as if the act of putting a nail to a board could stiff-arm destiny. And the people were stubbornly confident about its future.
Oh, yes, we are here to stay. We even have our own Silverton Women's Club, of which I am chairman, or chairwoman. Then, too, we have the San Juan Women's Club. In 1889, we availed ourselves of the vote and elected Nellie Tully of this very county as the first woman state treasurer. Yes, the future of silvery Silverton is as bright as the gleaming silver in the heart of her mountains.
That silver heart proved to be a little less faithful and a little colder than the lady hoped. The silver was getting harder and harder to mine, and the prices were down, way down. The influenza epidemic of 1918 hit San Juan County harder than any place else in the country. But Silverton never died completely. A little mining is done here today, and the town likes to call itself a mining camp that never quits. You can see the hard bones of the past under the spare flesh of the present. But what of the other towns in the area? Towns like Durango, which were also very dependent upon the silver mines. Some floundered, but Durango found other sources of economic survival when the silver gave out. Today, Durango plays host to thousands of tourists who come to ride the narrow gauge railroad, view the spectacular Colorado scenery, and relive the days of the Old West as they laugh along with a form of entertainment much beloved in the mining camps, the musicale and melodrama.
The Old West, tried to dig a prosperous life and a secure future out of the earth. In time, they failed.
They failed, but in another way, Ginny, perhaps a richer way, they didn't fail. Part of the West's present-day richness comes from the past, not from the silver and gold, but from the life of the people who searched and worked and died for it. In the days of the iron horse in silver pastures. We'll be back in just a minute. Thanks for joining us on Discovery's visit to the silver country of the San Juans in Colorado.
If you'd like to find out more about Colorado's silver rush and the history of the narrow gauge railways of the Old West, ask your librarian for these books. A Treasury of Western Folklore by B.A. Botkin, Narrow Gauge in the Rockies by Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg, and this book, The American Heritage History of the Great West.
Be sure to join us next week for another exciting Discovery program. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Discovery Production Unit's domestic transportation arrangements and production consideration provided by United Airlines. Hotel accommodations provided by the Strater Hotel, Durango, Colorado, and by the Grand Imperial Hotel, Silverton, Colorado. This has been a Jules Power production in association with ABC News and Public Affairs. Discovery 66 has been brought to you by